Okay, so I have one more role tonight, which is to me a very special role. I'm going to move here, maybe you can hear me a little bit better, which is to introduce our GideonKlein recipient, who, as Deborah told you, is Elizabeth Levy. And one of the reasons this is so special for me is I taught Elizabeth when she was an undergraduate journalism student at Northeastern. I had many conversations with her as she navigated the surprisingly treacherous undertaking of being president of Huskies for Israel. She's now back as a graduate student at Northeastern in our brand new media advocacy program, a joint endeavor of the School of Law and the School of Journalism. So I have long-standing connections to Elizabeth, but that's not the only reason. Elizabeth's GideonKlein research is designed to work in conjunction with a project I've been developing for a long time. I have spent many hours in the New York Public Library looking through its collection of the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars. The Emergency Committee was formed in the spring of 1933, just months after Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany. Within 3 months of his becoming chancellor, enabling legislation had been enacted that banned all those of Jewish descent from working for the German state, which included all German universities. Almost immediately, 1,200 Jews and non-Aryans were fired from their academic jobs, and at least 1,000 more were to follow from Germany. And then 6 months later, additional legislation banned Jews and non-Aryans for positions of cultural influence as well. So the Emergency Committee was formed in the United States to help the displaced German scholars. And it was not just German scholars, it was followed over the next years by academics from almost every country in Europe. And it was designed to help them obtain positions as professors in the United States. In 1945, the committee ended after 12 years and 335 placements out of 6,200 appeals. The Emergency Committee donated its papers, including over 6,000 folders on individual scholars, to the New York Public Library. So a few years ago, Northeastern journalism and computer science professors and students set out to create a website and database of all of those scholars, the 335 who were able to find teaching positions in the United States and the many thousands who weren't. Our first stage of rediscovering refugee scholars you see up there. So what we did is we did a pilot project of all the female scientists and mathematicians who asked the committee to help them. So what you see here is those are where the scholars were coming from, and then it's actually the 4 who are actually able to get positions in United States universities. And then we focused on 2 of them in particular, a mathematician and a biologist. But this was our pilot project. We always knew we wanted to go beyond that sample of about 100 scholars, and Elizabeth is working on our first expansion. In keeping with the mission of the GideonKlein Fellowship, which is to focus on Holocaust in the arts, Elizabeth has researched 3 distinguished female artists who sought the Emergency Committee's help. She will be using her skills, sharpened in the media advocacy program, to tell their stories to you and ultimately to add them to the Rediscovering Refugee Scholars website. So now I'm delighted to be able to introduce Elizabeth.
Thank you, Laurel, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Let's start at slide 1. Awesome. So before I begin, I also want to thank the Jewish Studies Holocaust Awareness Week Committee who helped put this together, and the sponsors of the GideonKlein Scholarship for making all of this possible. Today, I am sharing with you the story of 3 women artists who managed to escape Nazi persecution and land as refugees in the United States: Edith Weissman, Angela Engel-Weschler, and Gabi Flourishes. As you will see, there are quite a few common themes among these women's lives and journeys. including their perseverance, creativity, and perhaps a little chutzpah to succeed during times when women were mostly hidden in society. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries in Germany, Jews were starting to integrate into German society, despite a long history of anti-Semitism. A more secular, elite class of Jews began to be involved with German culture, joining in business ventures and intermarrying with non-Jewish Germans. Professionally, Jews were working in business, attending universities, and becoming professors. Many were artists, journalists, and even politicians. This integration continued through World War I, when almost 100,000 Jews fought for Germany in the war, and about 12,000 Jews lost their lives for the cause. Despite the anti-Semitism ingrained throughout the history of the country, Jews seemed to be in a better position than ever. Among those reaping the benefits of this new society was Edith Weizmann. Edith, and throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to the women as by their first names because they went through many iterations of last names. But Edith was born in Hamburg, Germany in 1885. She began studying piano with prominent musician Joseph Joachim at age 16 in Berlin, and there she learned under his instruction for about 4 years before continuing her studies privately among Berlin's leading musicians, most notably harpsichordist Wanda Landowska. As Edith became immersed in Berlin's music scene, Wanda inspired her to learn the instrument, over there on the left, and Edith soon found herself reviving lost harpsichord music in Germany. There she is playing the harpsichord on this picture of her hands. At age 29, Edith returned to Hamburg and married another painter, Wilhelm Mann, with whom she had one son, Alfred, in 1917. Though the marriage did not last, she remained active in Germany's music scene, and there she established the Society for the Revival of Ancient Music in Hamburg in 1925, and even helped create the Society's musical ensemble. Moreover, Edith also wrote for music journals, performed harpsichord throughout Germany as part of the German Philharmonic, and taught students at the University of Hamburg, who also became well known in their own rights. She was a pioneer, not just as a Jewish woman, not just as a Jewish musician, but also as a woman. This brings us to Vienna. During the same time of integration in Germany, Jews were also progressing in Vienna. New laws and the emergence of the Social Democratic Party in Austria allowed Jews to break out of their traditional roles as merchants and take up white-collar professions. By 1910, 11% of Jews in Vienna were self-employed artists, scholars, scientists, or the like, and Vienna became a hub of opportunity for Jews to ascend social ladders. This success not just limited to the male heads of the household. Jewish women also began to take up these new opportunities. One of these women in Vienna was Angela Engel Weschler. Angela was born in Austria in the late 19th century to a Jewish family. As a child, she attended school at the Women's Acquisition Club in Vienna, the bottom picture there, and eventually began studying music at the New Vienna Conservatory above her school. There, she found her success as a pianist. In 1919, at age 22, she married Henry Weschler, a lawyer, and the pair had 2 children, Irving and Maria, in Austria. Having children, however, did not stop Angela's career. In the early 20th century, Angela became a member of the jury in the International Piano Contest in Vienna, the head of the state concert examination course, and played in the Vienna Philharmonic. Well loved by her colleagues and students, in 1935, Angela was honored by the President of Austria with the title Professor for her talents. She was 38 at the time. Like Edith, her success and potential were huge. On the side here, these are recommendations from her students and colleagues in Vienna. This brings us to Gabrielle Wizow-Brill, who also landed in Vienna, though a little later in her life. Born in Berlin in 1913 to a prominent Jewish family, Gabi began studying art from a very young age and was, as her son Tom describes, a very sunny, upbeat person. But by 1933, when Gabi was 20 years old, things began to crumble for the Jews in Germany. Hitler was appointed as the Chancellor of Germany, and anti-Semitism became a real threat. Many wealthy Jews, including Gabi's family, began to leave the country. They first moved to Vienna, where Gabi could continue her studies as an artist. Her older sister, also an artist, eventually moved to Florence to work as a teacher in a school for mostly Jewish refugee children. Though living and studying in Vienna, Gabi paid her sister a visit around 1936. That vacation lasted a bit longer, as the 23-year-old met and fell in love with a man by the name of Wolfgang Wizow, pictured there. He was also a teacher at the school and a promising mathematician. Instead of returning to Vienna, Gabi stayed in Florence and began teaching at the school as well. Like the other two women, Gabi's potential as an artist was great, though her career was still young. Despite their potential, the political situation of the late 1930s would slowly tear the lives of the three women apart. As I mentioned earlier, when Hitler came to power in 1933, he began to initiate anti-Semitic legislation into the country. One of his first acts was to ban those of Jewish descent from attending public schools and universities. Similarly, Jewish faculty members at universities were removed from their positions in German institutions. The new legislation also gave the German state control of the arts, purging those of Jewish descent. At the time, Edith was hitting the height of her career. But despite her success as a harpsichordist, the 37-year-old was ousted from her position at the University of Hamburg in 1933. The following year, 1934, marked her last performance in Europe with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. As the situation for Jews worsened in Germany, Edith and her son realized they had to leave. Edith fled to Denmark. Her son left to teach in Italy and then England. In 1939, both Edith and her son landed in the United States as refugees, though the process for their arrival remains unclear. Austrian Jews were Hitler's next target. In March of 1938, Nazi Germany annexed Austria in an attempt to recreate Prussia, known as the Anschluss. Once that happened, Nazi legislation took effect in Austria, banning Jews from holding government positions, including those of university professors. Despite her success, Angela, 41 years old, was promptly dismissed from her position at the Vienna Conservatory, leaving her co-workers and students shocked and upset. Smartly, she collected recommendations, as you see right here. And that photo over there is people, the Nazis lining up, preventing Jews from coming into the university. Angela collected recommendations, and she and her family fled Austria to save their lives. In another unclear emigration process, Angela and her family of 4 arrived in the United States in the fall of 1938. Both Edith and Angela entered the United States as more refugees applied for entry. In 1938, the fascist Italian government also began passing anti-Semitic legislation. Under one of these laws, Jews of foreign nations were incriminated, and Gabi's sister and brother-in-law were arrested. Gabi and her new husband, however, managed to escape Europe through Wolfgang's Swiss citizenship in 1938. Through the assistance of American organizations such as the American Friends Service and the Emergency Committee, Wolfgang landed in the United States and obtained a position as a mathematician and scholar at Goddard College in Vermont, which you can see up above. And up here is Wolfgang's CV and resume application that the Emergency Committee received. Meanwhile, Gabi's sister also managed to escape a hostile Europe. She and her husband emigrated first to Brazil and then landed in Durham, North Carolina. And this photo here is a picture of one of Gabi's early art drawings. Once they arrived to America, the three women and their families searched for ways to survive in their new country, and all turned to the Emergency Committee in aid of displaced foreign scholars for help. As Laurel explained, Jewish philanthropists created this Emergency Committee in 1933 to assist with the employment of refugee scholars in American institutions. And that building right there is where the committee was housed. The collection of archives from the committee exists in the New York Public Library with correspondence between the scholars and the committee secretary. Here's a letter from Edith to the committee. And there's New York in 1938 when most of them arrived. These primary sources that the New York Public Library houses were a huge part of my research and also served as photos for many of the pictures you see in this presentation. Though their goal was direct funding, the committee also helped connect scholars to universities and other learning institutions to find employment. Once they landed in America, Edith, Angela, and Gabi all turned to the committee to help them rebuild. Coming from wealth and prominence in their home countries, the women arrived desperate for work and means of survival. At 43 years old, Edith made it to New York by herself with 5 keyboard instruments and a large library for lectures and recitals, as she wrote to the Emergency Committee looking for a job. Her son arrived separately as a student in Philadelphia and managed to find work as a librarian at the Curtis Institute. After a difficult process searching for work with the Emergency Committee, the once celebrated harpsichordist finally found employment teaching music privately and eventually performing on a radio program. In 1943, she started to play at the New York Town Hall with fellow musicians. And you can see one of the program for that on the left side there. Finally, in 1949, she debuted as a soloist in the United States as part of a show with famous tenor Donald Dame and the New York String Quartet at the age of 64. She also obtained a position as a lecturer at Rutgers University. However, her success only lasted a short time. She passed away in 1951 at the age of 66. Angela, once beloved and respected among Vienna's top musicians, implored the committee to help her find a position as a pianist or a piano teacher. Through a series of back and forth letters between the Emergency Committee and other institutions, the committee attempted to fund Angela's position at the New York College of Music. Although this didn't pan out, the National Council of Jewish Women ended up assisting so that Weschler secured the position in 1939. You can see a letter from the New York College of Music at the top left and also the bottom left. Again, she proved successful in her new country at age 42. In her new position, Angela continued performing as a concert pianist, directing the Brooklyn Philharmonic Orchestra. And along with her performances, she also taught students that would become celebrated musicians in their own right, including Richard Tauber, Joseph Schmidt, Elizabeth Schumann, and more. I couldn't find a photo of Angela, but I did find many of her students who performed tributes for Angela, wrote about her teachings and in memoirs, and thoroughly praised Angela in all aspects. Her son, Irving, also inherited her musical talents. He became a jazz pianist and a distinguished psychology professor at UCLA. Angela passed away in 1961 at the age of 64, survived by her husband, children, and grandchildren. Tragically, her son Irving died just a year later in a car accident, but his son, Lawrence Weschler, became a well-known journalist, writing for The New Yorker. Gabi and Wolfgang, at first, also sought the assistance of the emergency committee. Through Wolfgang's skills as a professor and mathematician, the committee helped him secure a position at Goddard College in Vermont. The arrangement secured the couple housing and accommodations, but did not pay actual money. In her entrepreneurial spirit, Gabi established a private visual arts studio during their first 2 years in Vermont, teaching students and earning money to try and rebuild the young couple's lives. And you can see some of her work here. Wolfgang's career as a mathematician took the pair first to Connecticut and then New York City after Vermont, and he eventually joined the Courant Institute of Mathematical Studies at NYU. There, in New York City, the couple had 2 children, Bernard and Thomas Wiseau. After moving around a few more times due to Wolfgang's career and finally landing in Los Angeles, the couple divorced in 1959 when Gabi was 46 years old. At that point, she established herself as a visual artist and started to sell her work. Gabi later remarried another German artist, Klaus Brill, and together they flourished as artists, experimenting with different types of multimedia art, such as printmaking, which she pursued until she developed progressing dementia at the age of 100. Since arriving in the United States, Tom, who I was able to speak to, said Gabi used her experience to become an advocate for the downtrodden. She volunteered at soup kitchens, found ways to help the homeless, and always cared deeply about the underdog. Amazingly, just 2 weeks ago, Gabi celebrated her 106th birthday. She's now living near her family in San Francisco, and despite the dementia, Gabi's children help her continue the legacy. They exhibit her artwork at shows for fundraisers, which you can see in the bottom corner picture. And she interacts with her 4 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The stories of these 3 women are not only a glimpse of the lives of Jews lucky enough to escape the horrors of the Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews, plus 5 million others who did not fit the Aryan ideal. These stories offer a sign of hope for those who were slowly stripped of their livelihoods, citizenships, and humanity in Europe. It demonstrates the strength and resilience of Jews and women who were lucky enough to escape persecution, going from widespread recognition for their talents to virtually nothing upon arrival in the United States. Their lives spared, they struggled to rebuild, and they succeeded, though perhaps only achieving a small percent of the success they could have reached if Europe was not so dangerous. To me, their stories reflect the essence of the Jewish people, who, despite facing persecution throughout history, continue to not just persevere, but also succeed and thrive. As a journalist and student growing up in the information and digital age, I feel a shared responsibility to learn and educate others about stories like Edith's, Angela's, and Gabi's to prevent history from repeating itself. Therefore, with Laurel's continued guidance, I plan to add these women's stories to a website in an attempt to make the information accessible to all. Thank you again to Laurel, who really guided me through this entire process, the Holocaust Awareness Committee, and the sponsors of the GideonKlein Scholarship. And thank you all for being here today.